In the quiet suburban town of Maplewood, where neighbors knew each other by name and rarely locked their doors, the Bennett family stood out not because they were loud or unusual, but because they were so perfectly ordinary. Michael Bennett was the kind of man people trusted immediately. Tall, calm, and always polite, he had served as the principal of the local high school for over a decade. His voice was steady, his decisions fair, and his dedication to the students unquestioned. He believed in rules, routine, and responsibility. To many, he was the ideal father figure, not just to his daughter, but to the hundreds of students who walked the school's halls under his watch. His wife, Linda Bennett, matched his steady nature with quiet warmth. She worked part-time at the local library and was known for recommending the perfect book for anyone who walked through the doors. Linda loved tea, classical music, and her family. She and Michael had been high school sweethearts. Their marriage, now over 20 years strong, was seen as a symbol of loyalty and lasting love in a world where relationships often faded fast. Their only child, Ava Bennett, had just turned 19. Bright, kind, and responsible, she was the pride of her parents. Ava had recently started her second year at the local community college, where she studied psychology. She had always been introspective and thoughtful, traits that made her both an excellent student and a loyal friend. People admired her without envy. She was the kind of girl others turned to for advice, confident that she would listen and offer genuine help. To the outside world, the Bennetts were the picture of happiness. They hosted backyard barbecues in the summer, baked cookies for their neighbors during the holidays, and volunteered at church events. Their house, a two-story colonial painted a soft blue with white shutters, was always well kept. Inside, the walls were lined with family photos, vacations to the coast, birthday parties, school plays. Their smiles seemed real, their laughter easy. It was the kind of home people dreamed of having. It was during one of her classes at college that Ava met Zoe Carter. Zoe was different from anyone Ava had ever known. With her short, dark hair, sharp wit, and contagious confidence, she quickly drew people in. She studied graphic design and had dreams of becoming an artist in New York. Zoe was outspoken, fearless, and full of opinions. Where Ava was calm and reflective, Zoe was fire and movement. The attraction was immediate. What began as casual conversations during breaks quickly turned into late-night phone calls and long walks around campus. After a few weeks of dating, Ava decided to introduce Zoe to her parents. She was nervous, not because she thought they would disapprove, but because Zoe meant something to her. She didn't bring people home often. This time, it felt important. Zoe's first dinner at the Bennett house was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Ava and Linda chatted easily, but Michael watched more than he spoke. He was polite, asking Zoe about her classes, her family, her future. She answered with confidence, cracking the occasional joke, which made even Michael laugh, a rare thing. After dinner, they all sat in the living room for a board game. Michael and Zoe sat across from each other. They were on the same team. They won. Over the next few weeks, Zoe became a regular presence in the Bennett household. She'd often join them for meals, help Linda in the kitchen, or stay over in Ava's room after movie nights. Michael started taking a greater interest in Zoe. He complimented her art, offered to help with her assignments, and once even brought home a book on graphic design from the school library, claiming he thought she might enjoy it. To everyone else, this was just Michael being kind and supportive, traits he was known for. Ava was thrilled that her parents liked Zoe. In her mind, everything was going better than she had hoped. Linda even mentioned once how glad she was that Ava had found someone so full of life. But slowly, subtle changes began to creep in. Ava started noticing small things. Zoe would go downstairs in the middle of the night for water and come back much later than expected. Sometimes she'd be unusually quiet after spending time alone with Michael. There were shared glances during family meals that felt out of place, too long, too knowing. Once, while walking in from the backyard, Ava saw Zoe and Michael sitting in the living room, their laughter stopping the moment they noticed her. Zoe quickly stood up and walked into the kitchen. Michael just smiled and asked if she wanted iced tea. Still, Ava didn't suspect anything serious. She was in love, and love tends to blind even the most observant. She assumed she was overthinking, convincing herself that Zoe was just trying hard to bond with her dad. After all, who wouldn't want to impress their partner's family? The days passed, and Zoe's presence became part of the household routine. She started coming over even when Ava wasn't home, claiming she was dropping off something or waiting for her to return. Ava noticed it, but never questioned it. She trusted Zoe completely, and she had never had any reason to doubt her father. Linda, too, remained unaware of anything unusual. She was busy with her work at the library and community events. She liked Zoe, appreciated the way she brought Ava out of her shell, and assumed that Michael's attentiveness was simply him trying to support their daughter's relationship. Michael, meanwhile, kept his emotions tightly under control. He continued his work at the high school, maintained his image in the community, and carried on his role as the responsible husband and father. But inside, something had shifted. What had started as admiration for Zoe's intelligence and charm had evolved into something more dangerous. He found himself thinking about her outside of family moments, noticing details about her that went beyond fatherly concern. He was aware of the line, but with each passing day, his guilt grew weaker and his desire grew stronger. What no one knew, what no one even suspected, was that the Bennett's perfect image was already cracking. A storm was building behind, their white shutters, and soon it would tear everything apart. The family that once stood as a model of love and loyalty was unknowingly standing on the edge of a devastating secret. One that would leave Maplewood in shock and turn the Bennett name from admired to infamous. Ava had always considered herself a grounded person, measured in thought, calm in action, and never quick to judge without evidence. But over the past few weeks, a creeping unease had settled in her chest like a fog she couldn't shake. Something had shifted in her relationship with Zoe. The warmth, the laughter, and the sense of ease that once defined their connection had started to disappear. Conversations felt shorter, less personal. Zoe had become distracted, her phone always in hand, but face down. She stopped making plans and started canceling without explanation. When Ava asked what was going on, Zoe brushed it off, blaming schoolwork or fatigue. Ava tried to believe her, but the gut feeling wouldn't go away. It was a Saturday afternoon when Ava decided to clean out her closet. She wasn't looking for answers, just an old hoodie she thought she'd lost. But while digging through a pile of jackets on the top shelf, her hand landed on something unexpected, a small leather-bound journal. The front cover was plain, worn at the edges. She immediately recognized Zoe's handwriting from a faded name, scrawled in the corner. It was Zoe's journal, though Ava had never known she kept one. She hesitated. 100 thoughts ran through her mind. It wasn't hers. It was private. But at the same time, she hadn't stumbled across this by snooping. It was sitting in her own closet, buried among her clothes. Why was it here? She sat on the edge of her bed and opened it. The first few pages were ordinary, notes about classes, sketches of tattoo designs, and quotes from movies they'd watched together. But as she flipped further, the tone shifted. The entries grew. More emotional, more conflicted. Then came the first line that made her stomach turn. I know I shouldn't feel this way about him, but it's impossible to stop. There's something about Michael, his presence, his eyes, his calm. It pulls me in, and I hate that it feels right. Ava froze. Michael, her father. She read further, trying to convince herself that she had misunderstood, that there had been some mistake. But each page pulled her deeper into a reality she wasn't ready to face. There were entries about late-night conversations in the kitchen, about how Michael made her feel seen in a way Ava never could. One page described the fear of being caught, the guilt of betrayal, and the thrill of secrecy. Another mentioned sneaking into the house late one night after everyone was asleep. Every word sliced through Ava's heart like glass. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Her body went cold, her thoughts numb. The room around her felt unfamiliar, her own belongings suddenly foreign. For a moment she wondered if this was all some twisted joke, an old creative writing project, or an exaggerated fantasy Zoe had written for herself. But it was too detailed, too real. This wasn't fiction. It was a confession. Ava placed the journal down gently, as if it might explode. Her breathing was shallow. She stared at the floor, her mind scrambling to piece together the last few weeks. All the things that hadn't made sense, the hushed tones, the shared glances, the sudden silences when she entered a room, they weren't coincidences. She had been blind. She had trusted them both, and now everything she knew about love and loyalty was crumbling around her. She left the house that evening without telling anyone. She went to her best friend's apartment across town and told her she needed a place to stay for a couple of days. She didn't give a reason. She couldn't. The words wouldn't come. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the journal's entries replaying in her mind like a broken record. Part of her wanted to confront them immediately, to storm back into the house and demand answers, but a quieter part of her held back, the part that needed certainty, evidence, something undeniable. She didn't want their explanations. She wanted the truth. 2 days later, Ava returned home. She was composed, quiet, and deliberate. She greeted her parents with a smile and told them she had stayed with a friend to catch up on group work. Nothing in her tone suggested anything was wrong. They believed her. She had already made a plan. In the living room sat a decorative wooden clock mounted on the wall. It was large, hollow, and mostly ornamental, something her mother had picked up from a yard sale years ago. Behind its front panel was just enough space for a small device. Ava purchased a hidden camera online, installed it carefully inside the clock, and synced it with her laptop. It faced the living room sofa, the very spot where Zoe and Michael often sat during family time, or when Ava was away. Then she waited. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Zoe came by briefly but didn't stay long. Ava began to wonder if they had grown distant. Maybe whatever had happened was over. Maybe it was all in the past. On the 4th night, while Ava pretended to be at a late study group, the camera caught something. Michael opened the door at exactly 9:13 p.m. Zoe entered quietly. They sat together on the sofa. At first, they talked, too softly for the microphone to catch. Then Zoe rested her head on his shoulder. Michael put his arm around her. A few minutes later, he kissed her. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It was deliberate, intimate, and full of history. Ava watched the footage the next morning in silence. Her hands shook as she paused and replayed the kiss, making sure she wasn't imagining. There it was. Undeniable proof. Not just a journal entry, not just suspicion, proof. The pain was sharp, but there was also clarity. She copied the footage onto a flash drive and emailed it to herself. Then she saved a copy to a cloud drive. She didn't know what she would do with it yet, but she wasn't going to let this disappear. In the days that followed, Ava kept her distance emotionally while pretending everything was normal. She needed time to think, to plan. The betrayal was too enormous to process in a single moment. She didn't speak to Zoe. She avoided her father as much as possible. Her mother, oblivious, continued to hum as she cooked dinner or read in the evenings, unaware of the volcano about to erupt beneath her home. But Ava knew the truth now. She had seen it with her own eyes. The next move was hers. Ava moved through her days as if on autopilot, her face calm, her voice steady, her presence unchanged, at least to those around her. But beneath the surface, she was unraveling. Every smile she offered her mother felt like a lie. Every meal shared at the dinner table was a quiet performance. Her heart beat in rhythms of betrayal and disbelief, and she couldn't stop replaying the footage in her mind. The kiss, the closeness, the way her father's hand rested so naturally on Zoe's back, it all haunted her. She hadn't spoken to Zoe since discovering the journal and capturing the video. Her texts went unanswered. Zoe's visits had stopped. Entirely. It was as if she had vanished, perhaps sensing the truth had surfaced. Ava didn't reach out either. The betrayal was too deep, too personal. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a complete tearing apart of trust, love, and identity. In the quiet of her bedroom, Ava spent hours going through the journal again, page by page. She began marking dates, looking for patterns. She started comparing Zoe's entries with her own schedule, checking when Zoe had claimed to be busy or tired. The overlap was sickening. Ava realized how many of those excuses had been lies to cover meetings with her father. And Michael, her own father, had welcomed Zoe into their home, had looked his daughter in the eye day after day, all while hiding something unforgivable. The worst part wasn't just the act. It was the layers of deception, the planning, the secrecy, and the way both of them had allowed her to go on loving them, trusting them, while they built something in the shadows. One evening, as she sat in her room staring at the flash drive, Ava felt a shift. The sadness that had weighed her down for days started to morph into something else. Resolve. She couldn't live like this, in silence and secrecy. Someone else needed to know. Someone who could do something about it. She couldn't carry the burden alone anymore. That night, she made the hardest decision of her life. She approached her mother, who was reading a paperback novel in the living room. Ava sat beside her and waited until Linda looked up. Her face was calm as always, her presence comforting. For a moment, Ava hesitated, but then she pulled the flash drive from her pocket and handed it to her mother. "There's something you need to see," she said quietly. Linda was confused, but took the drive and followed Ava into the study, where they plugged it into the family computer. The video loaded, and for several minutes, the room was silent, except for the hum of the CPU and the quiet crackle of recorded sound. Linda's eyes were fixed on the screen. She didn't blink. She didn't move. And when the kiss appeared, her breath caught. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat in stunned silence, one hand covering her mouth. The footage ended. Ava didn't speak. She didn't need to. Linda closed her eyes for a long time, then finally stood and walked out of the room without a word. That night, she didn't come down for dinner. She didn't leave her bedroom. The next morning, Ava found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red but dry, her back straight. She looked older. Ava wasn't sure what would happen next. She half expected her mother to confront Michael immediately, to demand answers. But Linda didn't. She went through the motions of the day as usual, but her warmth was gone. She was polite, but distant. Ava could feel the silence stretching between them, full of hurt and shock. 3 days later, Ava noticed changes. Her father started coming home later than usual. He didn't offer an explanation. Linda didn't ask. They barely spoke to each other. The distance was noticeable now, a silent war of avoidance playing out in their home. The usual comfort of their routines was gone, replaced by tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. A week passed before Linda made her next move. It started with a call to her lawyer. Ava overheard the conversation from the hallway, her mother's voice low but clear. Words like separation, evidence, and custody of property filtered through the door. That same evening, Linda sat Ava down and told her that she was filing for divorce. There was no anger in her tone, just sadness and certainty. "I can't stay married to a man who would do that to his daughter," she said softly. "And I won't pretend like our family is whole anymore." Ava nodded, tears threatening to fall. It felt like the end of something sacred, something once so strong. But she knew her mother was right. Nothing about their home was the same anymore. Word began to spread slowly. Michael was informed of Linda's decision through her lawyer. When he tried to speak to Linda, she refused. When he approached Ava, she walked away. The confrontation he expected never came. Instead, he was met with walls of silence and the cold distance of people who had once trusted him. At school, whispers began to circulate. Ava hadn't told anyone, but someone must have noticed the changes. Zoe had withdrawn from college entirely. Her social media accounts were deactivated. She had seemingly vanished. Some classmates speculated that she had moved away or dropped out because of a bad breakup. Only Ava and her mother knew the truth. One morning, as Michael left for work, Ava stood by the window and watched him drive away. He still wore the same tie he had worn for years, still carried the same coffee mug, still looked like the man who had walked her to school when she was little. But that man was gone. What remained was a stranger who had crossed a line no father should ever even approach. Later that week, Linda gave Ava something unexpected. The journal. She had read it, cover to cover. She had even highlighted passages that proved the timeline of the affair. Together, they made copies of everything. Linda kept one for legal proceedings. Ava kept one for herself. She didn't know why exactly. She had no plans to use it. But part of her needed to keep the truth close, needed to remember what had happened, so she wouldn't be fooled by smiles and soft words again. The house grew quieter in the weeks that followed. The routines stopped. The family that had once moved in perfect harmony now lived in fractured silence. The neighbors began to notice. Friends stopped calling. The once admired Bennett family became a subject of whispers and speculation, and in the middle of it all stood Ava, no longer the trusting daughter or the loving girlfriend, but someone who had seen the very worst sides of love and loyalty and survived. The weeks turned into months, and Ava's world continued to shift in quiet, painful increments. The house no longer felt like home. It was now a place filled with ghosts of what used to be. The once cheerful halls echoed with silence. The living room, where laughter had once filled the air, now seemed cold and still, as if trying to forget the betrayal it had witnessed. Her father still lived there, at least for now, waiting as the legal process moved slowly forward. He kept to himself, staying in the basement most evenings and avoiding both Ava and her mother. Linda had changed. She was no longer the soft-spoken, easygoing woman who hummed while she cooked or asked about Ava's day with a smile. She had grown quieter, more focused. She spent her free time reading legal documents, taking long walks alone, and packing things away in boxes labeled personal. Every action she took seemed to be part of a quiet exit strategy. Ava watched her mother become someone new, someone stronger, but also someone scarred. At school, Ava put on a mask. She kept her head down, avoided questions, and stayed out of conversations. Her friends noticed, but most didn't ask. Those who did received vague answers. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to explain what couldn't be explained without destroying her own voice in the process. Every time she saw an older man with a younger woman, every time she heard someone talk about trust or love, she felt a sick twist in her stomach. The world didn't feel safe anymore. One evening in early autumn, Ava came home to find the house unusually quiet. The lights were off, and there was no trace of her father's car in the driveway. Her mother sat at the kitchen table with a man Ava didn't recognize, tall, gray-haired, wearing a dark blazer and carrying a leather briefcase. Linda introduced him as a private investigator. He had been helping with the case, gathering timelines, verifying journal entries, and tracing Zoe's recent activity. He was calm, professional, and precise with his words. What he told them next chilled Ava to the core. Zoe hadn't simply vanished after the affair came to light. She had moved to another city, changed her phone number, and enrolled under a different name at a small college 2 states away. But that wasn't the worst of it. According to the investigator, Zoe had also contacted Michael several times in the weeks after the divorce was filed. Texts, emails, even attempts to meet in person. Despite everything, despite the exposure and consequences, she hadn't let go. Michael had responded. Ava sat frozen, the words barely sinking in. Her father, knowing what he had done, knowing the damage it had caused, was still in contact with Zoe. Whatever boundaries had been broken were not being repaired. They were being rebuilt behind closed doors. The investigator handed Linda a folder. Inside were printed screenshots, date-stamped messages, and phone records. Ava didn't need to read them all. Just seeing the names and the dates was enough. The communication hadn't stopped. It had just gone deeper underground. That night, Ava lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like she was falling through something she couldn't escape. Every time she thought the worst was over, another layer of betrayal peeled back to reveal something even more disturbing. Her father wasn't remorseful. He wasn't trying to fix what he broke. He was continuing it, secretly, shamelessly. Linda didn't confront Michael immediately. She moved with strategy and caution. The next day, she visited her lawyer again, this time with the new evidence in hand. The implications were serious. Not only was the affair morally devastating, but the continued contact, especially while divorce proceedings were active, gave Linda stronger legal ground. The lawyer advised her to prepare for a formal separation of assets and to request that Michael vacate the property. 2 weeks later, the court approved a motion requiring Michael to leave the house until the divorce was finalized. Ava wasn't there when he packed his things, but she watched from her window as he carried boxes to the trunk of his car. He didn't look up. He didn't try to speak to her. He simply drove away as if it were any other day, any other errand. The relief Ava felt was immediate, but not complete. His presence was gone, but the damage lingered in every corner of the home. She often found herself walking into rooms and remembering things she didn't want to, watching movies together on the couch, sitting at the kitchen island while he made breakfast, laughing over old family stories. All those memories now felt poisoned, repainted in shades of deceit. One afternoon, while clearing out an old cabinet, Ava found a photo album. It was one of the thick, leather-bound ones from her childhood, filled with pictures of birthday parties, vacations, and Christmas mornings. Page after page, there he was, her father, smiling beside her, holding her hand, lifting her onto his shoulders. There was a time when she had looked at those pictures and felt warmth. Now she could barely stand to look. She slammed the album shut and shoved it to the back of the drawer. Meanwhile, Linda began quietly preparing for a new chapter. She spoke about selling the house, about starting over in a new town, maybe even getting a fresh job. Ava didn't protest. The idea of leaving the home where everything had fallen apart felt like the first real breath of freedom. One evening, Linda surprised Ava with something unexpected: a letter. It was addressed to Michael but had never been sent. She had written it weeks ago after watching the video for the first time. In it, she expressed her grief, her anger, and her disbelief. But she also wrote about Ava, about how strong she had been, how brave. She wrote about the pain of watching her daughter go through something so cruel and unfair. And at the end of the letter, she wrote a single sentence that Ava would never forget. "You didn't just betray me. You destroyed the best part of our daughter's heart." Ava held the letter in her hands long after she finished reading it. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But something inside her shifted. There was still pain, still hurt. But there was also clarity. She hadn't deserved any of this. None of it was her fault. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop letting it define her. The chapter was far from over. But the next one was beginning to form. The seasons turned slowly, as if time itself was hesitant to move forward in a house still weighed down by its past. Ava had grown quiet, but her silence was no longer born of confusion. It had turned into a form of resilience. The girl who once clung to her routines for comfort had now learned to live in uncertainty. She no longer looked for answers that would never come. Instead, she began creating new paths for herself, tiny steps toward something beyond the wreckage. Linda followed suit. She put the house up for sale, hired movers, and began looking at apartments in another city. The place she had once filled with family photos and warm memories now felt like a museum of betrayal. Every creak in the floorboards, every paint chip on the wall, reminded her of the life that had been ripped from her. She spoke to Ava one evening over dinner and asked gently if she'd consider coming with her when the time came. Ava didn't hesitate. She was ready. She wanted distance, not just from the house, but from the small-town eyes that now looked at her with curiosity, sympathy, or worse, whispers. The day they moved out was overcast, fitting for a farewell so heavy. The truck pulled away from the curb. Ava looked back at the house one last time. She half expected a flood of emotion. but there was nothing left to feel for it. It was just a shell now, a place where things had fallen apart, where love had turned into something twisted and unrecognizable. In the new city, things were different, not perfect, but fresh. Linda found a job at a small art gallery, something peaceful and far removed from the chaos of the past year. Ava transferred to a new college campus, one where no one knew her name or her history. She lived in the dorms and spent her evenings reading, journaling, and slowly reaching out to people again. Trust came slowly. Smiles took time. But she was learning. One evening in the new apartment, Linda handed Ava a small package that had arrived in the mail with no return address. Ava's heart tightened as she held it in her hands. She knew even before opening it that it was from Michael. Inside was a single letter written on plain stationery in careful handwriting. The words were direct, but not cold. Michael wrote that he had moved to a small town in the Midwest, away from everything. He acknowledged the pain he had caused, admitted to the affair, and said he never expected forgiveness. He claimed to have ended all contact with Zoe after being ordered to leave the house. He said he realized too late what he had lost, his family, his daughter, his identity as a father. He didn't ask for a reply. He didn't beg for reconciliation. He simply said he was sorry. Then, at the bottom of the page, he added one line that lingered in Ava's mind long after the letter was folded away. "I never meant to destroy you." Ava didn't know what to make of it. She read the letter twice, then tucked it in a drawer. She rarely opened. Forgiveness wasn't something she could offer, not yet, maybe not ever. But for the first time, she felt that closure wasn't about him. It was about her. She didn't need him to understand her pain. She just needed to move beyond it. Time did not erase the past, but it softened its edges. Ava continued to write, something she had once loved but had abandoned during the chaos. Her words were different. Now, raw, layered, more honest. She began turning her story into essays, into fictional accounts that only hinted at the truth. She never used names. She never detailed what really happened. But the emotions were real. The betrayal, the silence, the survival. When she submitted one of her pieces to a campus writing journal, she was shocked when it was accepted and published. The feedback was overwhelming. People responded to the emotion, the vulnerability. Some even shared their own stories of betrayal, of unexpected pain from those closest to them. For the first time since everything had shattered, Ava felt seen. Not as a victim, not as the girl from the scandal, but as a survivor who had turned her pain into something meaningful. Linda, too, began to heal. Her laughter returned, slowly, cautiously. She made friends at the gallery and even began dating again, something Ava had once thought impossible. It wasn't easy watching her mother try to find joy again, but it was necessary. They had both lost so much. They both deserved something new. One day, during a quiet afternoon in the city park, Ava sat on a bench and watched people pass by. Strangers, couples, children. Life continued. People stumbled, people fell, but they got back up. They learned, they endured. She no longer searched faces for reminders of Zoe or flinched at the mention of her father. Those memories would always live in her, but they no longer controlled her. She had found peace, not in forgetting, but in understanding that healing doesn't mean erasing. It means surviving and choosing to live anyway. Ava had once believed love was simple, honest, pure, permanent. Now she knew it was far more complicated. Love could deceive. Love could lie. But it could also rebuild. In different forms, from different sources. That night, as she wrote in her journal, she penned a line she had thought about for months. I was broken once, but I refused to stay that way. And for the first time in a long while, she believed it.